The film unfolds in a loose, natural style that suits its teenage characters, whose collective mental state is reflected by the title. To the blaring, less than nostalgic music of bands like Foghat and Deep Purple and Black Oasis Arkansas, these high school students drive around and contemplate the future in American graffiti fashion. Their drifting is treated as a form of forward momentum, even though it sometimes becomes aimless and the film's improvised quality becomes overpowering. The actors bounce off one another with crazy riffs and cosmic observations, some of them unexpectedly funny. No film whose plot involves the quest for Aerosmith tickets can take itself too seriously, so the film has an equally enjoyable, playful spirit, one that amply compensates for its lack of structure. And at the heart of many of its tiny encounters are matters of real tenderness. And that was the New York Times review in 1993 of Dazed and Confused. Hello and welcome to Total 90s Recall, the podcast where we watch 90s films and ask, were they really as good or bad as we remember? Hi, I'm Molly, an actor, 90s kid, and film fan, and I'm joined by the person I would aimlessly ride around town smoking pot with, who is also an editor, 90s kid, and film fan, Chloe. Where were you the first time you watched Dazed and Confused, the film we're talking about today?
Well, I most certainly wasn't driving around in an open-top classic car in Texas. No? I was in deepest, darkest Dorset. I think I was probably a teenager, and I reckon that I most likely would have recorded it off of BBC Two or Channel 4 on a VHS. I had a whole stack of VHSs. If you are a film fan in a remote location in the 90s, your best bet is to basically wait until these things are shown in the middle of the night and then find out the Video Plus number. And so I just literally had dozens and dozens of these things all kind of carefully labeled up. I think I would put the date of the film on the label and I had sort of about 3 films on each videotape. So I probably watched it off of one of those VHSs some years after the film was first released in the UK.
That's great. See, people, this is why Chloe is on this podcast, the dedication to film and like keeping them organized and cataloged.
Yeah, well, I did. They were in a kind of messy stack under my under my VHS player, but yeah, I mean, there was definitely a case of I would get up, on a weekend and be like, okay, which of these avant-garde films that I've recorded from Channel 4 in the middle of the night do I want to watch, or do I just want to watch Wayne's World again?
Oh, which one won out more, the avant-garde or Wayne's World?
I think I would try the avant-garde stuff quite often, but yeah, I think I also got through Wayne's World quite a lot and the videotape was starting to wear out.
Nice. I was trying to think, first time I watched this film, came out in 93. I was 10. So I definitely did not watch it when it first came out. And I think I found out about it either senior year of high school or freshman, sophomore year of college. So I was definitely an adult by the time I watched it. And a lot of my friends were like, oh, you gotta watch this film. It's so cool, man. And I remember liking it at the time, but I also don't remember if I liked it because all my friends thought it was cool and I wanted to be like the cool kid. And this was when I really started to like get into films, and I was as part of my film education, not just like the blockbusters, but watching the foreign films and films from way back in the day, right? So, but I definitely remember watching this and liking it. But spoiler alert, I really liked it on the rewatch when I watched it last night. I was like, which we'll get into more, but I was definitely like, oh my God, this holds up, even though this takes place in the 70s. And, I was a kid in the 90s. I loved this film actually on the rewatch. And I don't remember loving it as much the first time I watched it. I don't remember if it was a true love or a fake love is all I'm going to say. Yeah. So, okay. So before we get into that, let's get into the stats of Dazed and Confused, the film we are talking about today. So it was released in the US on September 24th, 1993. It was very, 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 very way, 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 way down there at the box office. But the weekend that it came out, here's some interesting things. The Fugitive was number 1 at the box office. Our episode 1 subject, Jurassic Park, was still in the top 10 at its 16th week at the box office at number 8. True Romance was in the top 10 this week, and Sleepless in Seattle was still holding on at number 14. And it came out in the UK a year later on September 16th, 1994. It earned just over $8.2 million against a $6.9 million budget, which basically means it lost money. When you're hearing about budgets and films making enough, it's only a success if they double their budget. Essentially, when we think about marketing and all this, the investment and stuff. So this definitely wasn't a moneymaker. And writer-director Richard Linklater definitely talked about later how he lost money. So let's talk about everybody else in this film. It is a long list, and we can get into why that is. So I'm going to give a bunch of names, but these are certainly not everybody featured in this film, but these are kind of like either somebody important to the plot or somebody important later in life. So starring Jason Landon, Joey Lauren Adams, Milla Jovovich,
Jovovich, I think.
Jovovich. I knew it. Okay, so
yeah,
Milla Jovovich.
And also I think it's Jason London.
What did I say?
Landon.
Oh, you're right. No, it is Jason London. I don't know why I said Landon. It was like my Southern accent coming in. Okay, you know who we're talking about. Great. See, this is why I have Chloe. Okay. Oh, what was I going to say about Mia is it was really interesting. So she was like the biggest name at the time, and she was on the poster, but then she had a very small part, which I thought was kind of interesting. If you were just seeing this film, I would think that she would have been, first or second star, but she was just only in a handful of scenes. Anyway, also Rory Cochrane, Adam Goldberg, Anthony Rapp, Sasha Jensen, Michelle Burke, Cole Hauser, Wiley Riggins, Ben Affleck, Parker Posey, and of course, Matthew McConaughey. And here's the log line. It was the last day of school in 1976, a time they'd never forget, if only they could remember. Chloe, to put this in perspective, so this takes place in 1976. It was filmed in 1992. So that means if this was made today, this film would be about 2007.
Which seems like only yesterday to me, but it's scarily long ago.
I know. Well, the funny thing is, so most of the actors on this list, they were born around 76 or maybe like early 70s to mid 70s. So it'd be like somebody that was probably born in 2007, they would probably star if this was made today. So why are we talking about Dazed and Confused on Total 90s Recall? And that is because, on this podcast, we're talking about blockbusters, we're talking about bombs, but we also talk about cult classics. And there is a film that defines what a cult classic is. It is Dazed and Confused. It flopped at the box office, as I mentioned, but it immediately became a cult classic. Chloe, why did you want to cover Dazed and Confused?
Well, I think here is where I'm going to try not to bore on about my love for Richard Linklater.
I think everybody would be fine with that.
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing is that this is the film that put him on the map, right? He'd made a couple of features before this, and this is possibly the film that kind of everyone thinks of when they think about Richard Linklater's early career. The next film he went on to make was Before Sunrise, which is one of my all-time favourite films. When we get to do it, we'll just need to do an extended episode, a two-parter or something. But I love Richard Linklater. I think I admire him because he has such a variety to his filmmaking, but he still remains distinctive. And he has a lot of experimental films that he's made. So Boyhood, which he made over several years. He is in the process of making a film adaptation of Merrily We Roll Along. But over the course of 20 years, it's going to be released in 2040. I think that's just incredible. And he did rotoscoping and A Scanner Darkly. He's done adaptations. He's done historical films, romances, comedies, action, mockumentaries, animation. He just always keeps it moving and does surprising and different projects. And I think to sort of bring it back to Dazed and Confused, his films often experiment with time and memory, but they're very kind of grounded in human relationships. And, I think of Before Sunrise and its sequels as kind of the best examples of his kind of freewheeling, improv-inspired style, where the actors are really inhabiting the characters. But Dazed and Confused is probably where he's really kind of developing that and creating this hallmark. And I think also it's very interesting that he often gets his actors to contribute to the script.
Yeah.
So with Dazed and Confused, he literally told them, if you don't like your character, then change it. So it is this kind of collectivist approach to filmmaking, which I also really admire. That was more about Richard Linklater than it was about Dazed and Confused.
Yeah, but I think for me, there's obviously like the plot of the film, and we can talk about that. There's also the other story surrounding this film, and I think it is Richard Linklater and the breakout stars. You know, we know these names, Parker Posey, Ben Affleck, Matthew McConaughey now, but they were unknowns at the time, right? Or had done like a couple of films. So I think you can't talk about Dazed and Confused. Like, it would be a disservice to this film if we didn't talk about Linklater and his approach to films and his process for this film and kind of what brought him up. One reason I was really excited, he has 2 films coming out now. There's Blue Moon and then Nouveau Vague, which is a black and white film about the French New Wave. And then Blue Moon is about, is it Roger and Hammerstein's? Like their last night.
Is it about Oklahoma or something?
Yes, it's about Oklahoma.
Yeah.
So like 2 subject matters that could not be more different. But he has them coming out in the same year. And I think, to your point, that's Richard Linklater. It's hard to say what is a Richard. I mean, I think we can talk about what is a Richard Linklater, but he doesn't just do fantasy or sci-fi or, you know.
Yeah. He doesn't confine himself to a genre.
No.
And I mean, I really liked his recent film Hitman, which
I was going to say the same thing. I loved it.
Brilliant,
Yeah.
you know. And so I think there's something really great. But I think he's also an actor's director. Like, he obviously forms these long-running partnerships, particularly with someone like Ethan Hawke, who he's made lots of films with. I feel like Ethan Hawke and Richard Linklater are kind of connected spiritually and have kind of developed and grown up together in that way. Obviously, he worked on the Hitman script with, name the actor.
Oh my God. Glenn Powell.
Glenn Powell. How could we forget Glenn Powell's name?
Oh, Glenn Powell.
He worked on the script with him, and I think there's this kind of, you can see how there's a bit of a partnership forming there. So yeah, lots of admiration for him, but I do feel like I have already made my case for why he is one of the best directors ever.
It's funny. I was listening to this interview that he did with Vanity Fair in 2024. And, you know, whether you're talking about an actor or a director, or even if you're an athlete or a writer, and people are like, oh, well, what was your big break? And sometimes you don't realize it until it's already happened. And he said, now looking back, his second film was Slacker. And that's what really people kind of started to take notice from that. And that's how he was able to get the money from Universal to do Dazed and Confused. But he said that, you know, now that he's like looking back, Dazed and Confused is his make or break film, which I totally agree. And then what you're talking about, this improvisation, as an actor, yes, please sign me up for more. Like, I love that. And I think you're completely right. He's definitely a actor's director. I mean, Ethan Hawke and Boyhood, was it over 6 years or was it 10 years? I can't remember.
It was quite a few years, yeah.
I can't remember. It was either 6 or 10 years. And you got to just know that those two created a bond and a relationship. I mean, he's now in Blue Moon again this year, as I mentioned. But what's interesting about Dazed and Confused, talking about, like, as an actor, I hear improv and I'm like, yes, please, I will take some more. But some actors, particularly in this film, didn't like that. It really worked for some actors like Parker Posey and Matthew McConaughey. And then for other actors, it didn't work as well. It was the guy who's supposed to have the party at his home.
Oh, Kevin. Yeah.
Yeah. So apparently improv really wasn't his strong suit. But Matthew McConaughey, I think we're going to get more into, improv was his strong suit. So that helped him and others get more scenes. But because of the improv, that made the studio nervous. Because, you know, now we have like Christopher Guest films and we have The Office. And so that's, I feel like we're kind of used to that. You know, this is in 93. The studio was very nervous about this improvisation. And he said, not everyone picks up on the vibe of what you're trying to do, though. There was an actor, Sean Andrews, that's the guy, Kevin, who wasn't exactly rocking and rolling with the rest of the cast. So I switched things around to expand Matthew McConaughey's role instead. And I think it worked really well. I mean, what did you when you were looking at this? Do you see the improv? Do you see the script? What were your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So I think the actors inhabit their characters very naturally, and the tone of the film is very naturalistic. There's something almost documentarian, and actually the contemporary reviews use the word anthropology or anthropological quite a bit, and I think that kind of makes sense, that it's, you know, it's set over a day and a night. It's a kind of slice of life. There's very little in the way of plot. The main conflict is sort of Ben Affleck's character O'Banion beating these younger kids and them getting their revenge. But mostly it's just these characters cruising around, hanging out and saying how bored they are and how much they want to get high and get drunk. And yeah, there's something about that kind of captures this kind of aimless freedom. It's boredom, but it's also just that kind of listlessness of being a teenager at the beginning of the summer. And there's something very honest about, particularly I think the younger characters. They're quite innocent. I think the casting is so good because they genuinely do look like young teens.
Yes.
They're meant to be sort of, well, you can explain what age freshmen are and what age seniors are, but I believe they're about the right sort of age.
Yeah. So when you're a senior in high school, you were 18. So working backwards, I think when you're a freshman, you're 14, thereabouts. But now starting freshman year of high school, that's your first year. There are 4 years in high school. So there's freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. And so when you're starting freshman year, let me think. Yeah, you would be 14 and then you would turn 15, and then sophomore year, you would be 15, turning 16. Yeah.
So they're really young teens, and they look it, and they have this kind of innocence, and you can see the way that they're awkwardly trying to fit in with the more grown-up teens, the way in which they kind of, you know, awkwardly accept invitations to the parties that have been bestowed upon them. Yeah. You know, they're terrified of them. I mean, they have actually just been hazed or even beaten by these boys and these scary older girls. But when they kind of get invited to the party, they're very excited.
Which I totally would have been too. Like, I totally would have, yep, I'll
it gets that
come.
Dynamic. That dynamic of, I guess, trying to fit in. You know, it's set in the 70s, but that would have felt true
universal
at any point. Yeah. So I just to kind of talk a little bit more about the tone, because I think it's interesting that, you know, the way it's made, it's not following any one set of characters very faithfully. So you get this kind of vignettes of characters. Sometimes the camera will kind of frame little groups of them at mid-distance, so it's almost like we're just kind of listening into them at a party. Sometimes the camera will track, you know, a couple of characters as they wander through the high school or through the pool hall, and then it will pass another group and then pick up with them. So there's a kind of real looseness to the style. It really is kind of a bit like we are watching them. It's observational, and therefore some of the more outrageous things that the characters do, I don't know to what extent we're meant to kind of align ourselves with those characters or take their point of view. I don't know, what do you think?
What I really liked about the film is when I was watching it, I felt like I was in this place. I really don't know who the main character is. You know, typically in a film, within the first like 5 minutes, you know who like the important characters are, or at least one of them. And in this one, again, it's roaming, which I think for me made me kind of think of high school. You're going in between these different groups. And is also kind of a metaphor for the whole film. Again, it's setting up, this is how the whole film is going to be. Like, we're just dipping in and out. And I think another reason it sets the tone so well is all these extras, they are actual high school students. They actually casted them in Texas where this was filmed. And they are actual children, you know, they're actual high school students. What I loved about this film is the fact that it is roaming. And, you know, Linklater, he's talked about how he thought the 70s sucked and how he didn't want this nostalgia film. He actually fought the studio with that. And let's all admit it, like, being a teen sucks. Like, it sucks. And so you have all these teen films that, oh, it's such a great time, blah, blah, blah. No, it sucks. And I totally relate to just kind of being aimless and roaming around. And this was made in the 90s, about the 70s. but this is very Americana. For me, this is something I still did in the 90s with my friends. We're riding around in the movie's parking lot, and then we were Stevie B's parking lot. Then we were just going around trying to find something to do. Like those three friends that were like the poker players. They're like the ones that don't know anyone, and they're kind of losers. I don't want to say I was a loser, but I'm like, sometimes I think that was me. I liked the fact of this roaming, and I think Linklater set out to really show how teenagehood and the 70s were this aimless time, and I think he totally nailed it on the head. I think watching back, now that I'm very far removed from being a teenager, I'm like, oh, I totally relate to this.
Yeah. I think also Linklater very much wanted to suggest that even though there are these tribes, to some extent, there's the jocks, there's the slackers and the stoners, and there's the kind of smarter kids, they are all still kind of friends and socializing with each other, probably because there's not much else to do in this place. And that kind of is followed through, I think, in the costumes, but there's a looseness to their social groups as well as to the way the camera moves and the plotting, such as it is.
Which I totally relate to. I don't know about you, but I had friends who were jocks. I had friends who were popular. I had friends who weren't. I had friends in all the groups.
Yeah. I think I probably was. I mean, I think my experience is probably a little bit different to most American 90s teens because of the fact that we did not drive. You can learn to drive from 17 in the UK, and it's obviously expensive and kind of maybe quite an aspirational thing, which is, I think, why American teen movies are so exciting to British teens, because it's like this idea of you having all this independence, you can go where you want to go, whereas over here it's like you've got to get to the bus or you have to get a lift from your mum and dad.
Is there like an equivalent to the UK?
I think certainly in as much as roaming around town centres, but there's more romance to roaming around in a car, particularly an open top classic car as here, compared to just hanging out outside, the Iceland or
Boots,
or in my day, Topshop, or I guess it would be Primark now or something. But that sort of thing of like the British high street is obviously not remotely as glamorous as the
I definitely would not say suburban America is glamorous.
But then you've got, those sort of drive-through fast food joints. You've got the pool hall. In the film, there are these things. I think, this thing about anti-nostalgia is really interesting. And that's the other kind of main thing that when I was thinking about the film afterwards, I kind of was thinking about little details that started to kind of ping out to me. And I read up something about what Richard Linklater said about making the film, and as you say, he thought the 1970s sucked, but he admits that in making a film about how bad things were and being truthful about it, you end up somehow creating a nostalgic film. He kind of compared it to a war movie. Like, unfortunately, war ends up looking kind of cool on film, and the same here. The kids are all talking about how bored they are and how pointless their lives are. And there's lots of little mini speeches throughout. Cynthia, who's the redhead who gets chatted up by Matthew McConaughey's character David, sort of says something along the lines of, "I like to quit thinking of the present like right now as some minor insignificant preamble to something else," which I think is a very kind of articulate way. Obviously, she's the geek character. Pink, who's sort of in some ways nominally the main character, but not really. He's a jock of some description. He plays football, American football. And
he's the quarterback, Chloe.
He's the quarterback.
The number one guy on the team.
Okay. I need to have this interpreted for me. But you don't actually see him play football, in fairness. But he's asked at the beginning to sign an anti-drug pledge. And he refuses this on principle. He compares it to McCarthyism, and that it's oppressing his individuality and his personal choices, and he basically sticks it to the man at the end, which I think is very Gen X, even though he is technically a boomer. But Linklater calls the sort of tail end of this generation the busters, and they're all quite cynical about this world and how boring and pointless their lives are, and they're waiting to get going, and they want to like get drunk, or they want to sleep with girls, or whatever it is. Dawson says that, you know, he hopes that he will have had as much fun as he can while I was stuck in this place.
Yeah.
And he keeps on repeating that. But the social context, I think, is really interesting. I don't know if you want to sort of speak to, you know, the importance of 1976 as a date.
So 1976 was the 200th anniversary of America. That was our Declaration of Independence, and that's when we consider that the founding of our country officially. So it is interesting that he chose this year. I mean, obviously, he remembers this, and talking about the anti-drug letter he had to sign, that was actually based off of Linklater's real life. He had that happen. And so then he said that then just kind of expanded from there. And to your point, Pink is like, you know what? I hope this is not where my life peaks. That's not exactly what he said.
He says, if I call this the best days of my life, then remind me to shoot myself.
Exactly, Pink, because things can get better. You know, I think about, for some people, those were the best days of their lives. But for other kids who were bullied or just weren't understood, it's good to know that these weren't the best.
Yeah,
the best days.
They're hoping for more, aren't they? And I think that's the thing about the flip side of Gen X cynicism is there's an idealism that comes with it, I think. And I kind of imbibe that, this idea of like, you know, you're not going to become a corporate shill for the man, and, you know, you're going to reject capitalism because truth and art and love and life and everything is more important, and freedom. And that's a kind of, I guess, a countercultural thing. But there's still that kind of idea of we're going to stick it to the man, which I think has largely gone away. And we now live in a world where probably, and this is a terrible generalization, but there's more young people than I would hope who go, I'm going to work for the man and I'm going to make a lot of money, or I'm going to be very independent and make lots of money and prove to the man that I'm as good as him. And it's like, no, that's still capitalism. So yeah, there's that aspect. I think also just that historical context. So it's post-Vietnam, it's post-Watergate. So it's a kind of time when America's innocence is lost. The teens are kind of quite clear-eyed about that. They don't really care about, they're not patriots. And actually their teacher, you know, you hear her, she's
I love that
she's
teacher.
Sort of going, you know, I've got the quote here actually. So obviously there's a big banner that says Happy Birthday America, but she's actually going, you know, this summer when you're inundated by all the American bicentennial 4th of July brouhaha, don't forget what you're celebrating. And that's the fact that a bunch of slave-owning aristocratic white males didn't want to pay their taxes. So she's very right on.
And she also talks about like the 1968 Democratic Convention. And I think that was the convention, if I remember correctly, that was in Chicago, and it was absolutely mad and it was crazy. And it was actually a lot of liberals and hippies and yippies, as they were called at the time, stormed the Democratic Convention because they were like the very progressive left wing of the party. And so it's kind of funny that she's like, oh, that was just the best. That was just, she's talking about that because that's her
cool,
showing
man.
How cool she is. Yeah.
And I think the other teacher, he waves away the younger kids' fears about being beaten up by the older kids when he's like, well, you know, in Vietnam, we were told some of us might not return.
Yeah.
So the teachers are quite jaded. They've probably passed on their cynicism and their, you know, clear-eyed view of America to the kids. I noticed also the high school is named after the Confederate General Robert E. Lee. So it's this kind of quite conservative very conservative background that they're growing up in.
But also very common in Texas.
Yes. Yeah.
Like there's probably, I don't know this for sure. So if I'm wrong, I apologize in advance. But I would not be, there's probably still Robert E. Lee high schools in Texas.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. We can leave that there.
But that's that thing of they're in this world and they're sort of going, well, we kind of reject that, and we reject what, you know, our kind of parental figures are telling us to be, you know, be straight and not drink and all this kind of stuff. Also, I noticed that, you know, they have those kind of KISS effigies. So like the sort of in the back of the truck, they've got these sort of statues which are painted to look like members of the band Kiss. And I don't know if it was included in this cut, but I found out that apparently the context is that they've nicked a couple of statues, some historical statues from the town, and then sort of painted them.
Yeah.
So there's this real sense of like they are rejecting everything that came before, and they do not buy into that value, which I think is Linklater. He would have been like 15 or 16 at the time, and I feel like there's something autobiographical in this.
Yeah, he talked about this, how to what you've said is, this is post 60s, this is pre 80s, and the 80s were very transformative, very good time for capitalism. But this is post hippie, post 60s, and so they are in this like culturally in this in between time, and Linklater felt that way. These kids feel that way, and I think that's clear. So in America, like your last day of school, it's very like, who cares? It's fun.
Yeah.
People are going from room to room. Is that the same in the UK?
I mean, some schools might have like sort of muck-up day where you go around like, I don't know, toilet papering everything or whatever. And we did a thing where did we do it or was it the year above? This is so long ago that I can't remember, but we basically did a kind of dead body outline on the steps leading to the chapel. I went to a Catholic school. Yeah, so there is an element of like, we're going to sort of be naughty, but it's not playing mailbox baseball. I don't know. It must vary from school to school. But I was interested to know whether or not this whole kind of rather ritualistic hazing that goes on, and the so-called busting that the boys do to the younger boys, is that a thing in America?
That is not a thing where I'm from. I don't know. I mean, that's definitely a thing in college. Like, this is something you would see in college campuses.
Okay.
And it can get horrific on college campuses. But I never experienced this. I don't know anywhere else that does that. That's not to say it doesn't happen. And Texas is almost like its own country sometimes. So maybe this is something very common in Texas. And like Linklater did take this from his own life. So I wonder if he made that up or that is something he experienced. But yeah, the hazing, I was like, this is more like college than high school.
Okay.
But it was interesting, like they treat these kids like shit. And then they're like, oh, but we're buddies now and all is forgiven.
But I think that is a thing you see in lots of cultures, isn't it? It's to be part of the tribe, you now must go through this rite of passage where you are going to nearly die or at least undergo some sort of physical harm. I guess it's about sort of establishing hierarchies, because at the end of the film, towards the end of the film, the girl, what's the name of the young girl?
The young girl who's now a freshman.
Yes.
I don't remember her name.
And she sort of befriends Tony. Basically, she sort of ends up saying no to, I think, Parker Posey's character, or possibly Parker Posey's character. Yeah. And, she refuses to kind of carry on being hazed, and Parker Posey's character then says, I'm going to make every single day of your life in high school living hell, and threatens it. But she's obviously so drunk and high that she probably won't remember. But that element of like establishing like who's the top bitch. But I think with O'Banion, Ben Affleck's character, perhaps there's more a sense of because he's repeating a year, I think.
Yeah.
He's got to try and prove himself. He didn't pass his exams or whatever it is. So he's got to show he's the tough guy because he's actually small and weak.
Yes.
And he's proven so by the end.
Exactly what I was about to say. And like just another child when he gets what's coming to him. So let's talk about, we said names like Parker Posey, Ben Affleck. These were no names at the time. Ben Affleck had been in a few things. Fun fact. So the guy, Sasha Jensen, who plays Don, the guy with the eyebrows, and Ben Affleck were in another film together right before this, a film that was, I would say, a cult classic and then became a very popular television show that I loved, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which I had no idea. I didn't know Ben Affleck was in that. I had forgotten that. For me, Ben Affleck didn't come on the scene until it was really Good Will Hunting, but he had done so much before that. I didn't really realize, but for me, he came into my consciousness in Good Will Hunting. So these are big names to us now. Anthony Rapp, obviously like prolific Broadway star. He's on Star Trek now. He's lots of things. But really, of course, we can't talk about this without talking about Matthew McConaughey. Actually, Linklater didn't like him at first because he thought he was too handsome for the role. And then Matthew McConaughey is like, look, I'm not this guy, but I know this guy. And he actually modeled the character off of his brother. And Linklater's like, oh, we need to make you ugly. So grow your hair out and grow your beard. Matthew McConaughey, as we probably all know, all right, that he improvised. And he was the breakout star. I clocked it. He did not come on screen until 40 minutes and 53 seconds into this film. So it was almost halfway through until he comes on. And he's the one you most associate with, but he's certainly nowhere near the main character.
His role was expanded, though, wasn't he?
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to speak about how he was discovered, because I think that's a bit of an interesting story. Oh, well, I think basically he's told the story on a few kind of chat shows, but essentially he was in a bar and I think the bartender pointed out that down the end was Don Phillips, who's this kind of legendary casting director. And so Matthew McConaughey introduced himself and they ended up kind of hanging out, but Don Phillips was a bit sort of standoffish. But they bonded over the fact they both played golf, which seems a little odd to me, but, you know, and then basically Don Phillips kind of asked Matthew McConaughey, do you act? And so he said, well, I've been in like a kind of beer commercial, you know, it was more like a modeling gig than actually acting. So he got to try out for the part. I've watched his audition tapes. He is just exactly as he is in the film. He's completely inhabiting that character there and then. And evidently Linklater found that he was worth keeping on set. And as you said, the other actor, I think he's called Sean Andrews, was meant to have a bigger role and didn't vibe with this process for whatever reason, and so had his role reduced, and Matthew McConaughey's role was beefed up, and he was given opportunities to kind of improvise the all right line, which is the worst rendition of it ever. I apologize.
I wasn't going to say, but yes.
All right.
All right.
You do it so perfectly. That line, he was asked to improvise something, and he kind of had been listening to Jim Morrison on the Doors live album, and he says that to the crowd. He's kind of psyching himself up. So he thought that's kind of how my character would behave. So he kind of used that in his performance, and somehow it's become his catchphrase as an actor. It's kind of attached to him.
I mean, it made him who he is, if you really think about it, because if it wasn't for that character, who knows how long he would have gotten his break. His production is JKL Productions, which stands for Just Keep Living. And in the film, he goes, LIVIN, gotta keep living. And Linklater, talking about his being discovered, he said, the story of Matthew getting discovered is so different than like the story of Lana Turner getting discovered at Schwab's drugstore. People think Matthew was in a bar and he just happened to be talking to a guy who happened to be a casting director. But it's like, no, Matthew knew Don was in town casting movies and Matthew went over to him. He's the one who introduced himself. He grabbed that opportunity. Matthew has a very methodical side to him. He's very clear thinking in how to go from A to B to C. He's not just bouncing around. People want to believe it was just like, hey, you should do movies, because they want to believe it could happen to them.
So he was much more calculated.
Yes. His friend was a bartender at this bar, and his friend was like, this casting director, Don Phillips, is in here. And so, you know, McConaughey was like, oh my God, I know exactly what this is, and came. And then knew, you know, was drinking, and then he went up to him.
Okay, so I think he has to play this game of it was fate and chance, because that kind of calculated aspect of I want to make it as an actor would not fit with his kind of his vibe, his identity in our minds. So that's interesting.
Yeah. And real quick, going back to the Sean Andrews, he's the one that was supposed to have the party at his house. You can kind of tell in the script he didn't vibe well with other people. And I do remember thinking like halfway through, I'm surprised he's not in this more. And then after I learned this, I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense.
He got edited out, yeah. In terms of casting, I mean, I love Wiley Wiggins. It plays the character of Mitch, and he's sort of like the more innocent young boy who gets a horrible, what they call busting, which is just basically a beating from Ben Affleck and the others, but then gets accepted into their group and manages to kind of impress them by just sort of talking the talk in the grocery store and buying, you know, a 6-pack of beer or whatever, and so styling out so he's able to kind of prove himself. Apparently Wiley Wiggins was kind of discovered by another casting director who just handed him a flyer, and he was very much how they envisioned.
Yeah.
And Renee Zellweger is in it.
Yes.
Yeah, you do not realize that she's in it.
Yeah.
Like, I did not clock her.
Preparing to watch it, I did, you know, I was trying to like remember, who all was in this? So I was looking, it said Renee Zellweger. And so I was like, and I'm very good at being the person that's like, there's that random person that was in that film, and they just like go across the screen. And I was like, wait, where was Renee? And so after it was over, I had to Google, and she was one of the seniors who's like giving them, like putting mustard on them.
Yes.
And she was also the girl in the blue truck, you know, helping Parker Posey do a beer funnel, which makes me wonder if maybe and I do not know if this is true, so I'm not saying this about Renee Zellweger, but it makes me wonder if she was, again, one of those that maybe didn't do as well with improv, whereas like Parker Posey is known for doing great improv. And so Parker Posey got bumped up and Renee just kind of stayed where she was. I have no idea.
I think what's also wonderful about this cast is, you know, calling back to that thing about how they made it, apparently not only were they asked to improvise and everything, but they were also, a lot of them were staying in the same hotel whilst they were shooting it. And apparently, I don't want to get into trouble, but essentially they were all partaking in substances,
yes,
having a high old time.
Yeah.
And put it this way, Ben Affleck said that he was the only one who nobody was sleeping with. So they were kind of enacting,
is that surprising?
Probably not the younger cast members, but the older cast members were enacting the film off set as well. And so that probably adds to that kind of, you know, that free vibe where they've all known each other for their whole lives. They are kind of very familiar with each other. So I think that's very funny.
I mean, they're young actors in the 90s and they're just kids.
They don't have to be as tightly controlled about the reputation in like in today's world.
Yeah, there's no social media. Yeah. They're not a big name. Like this, it's almost like the Friends cast before it went big. They all went to Vegas together and just had a merry old time. Like that's what you do. It reminds me of like when you go on tour and stuff, like you just party a lot and it's a lot of fun. And just like the nature of this, like, of course they're smoking pot.
I think the other thing that's interesting about the way in which Linklater prepared them for their roles was he made them all mixtapes.
Yes.
Which I think is delightful.
Yeah.
And so he was giving the girls lots of Joni Mitchell to listen to and the boys more kind of rock classics. It says so much about Linklater's approach to this film. Apparently, he saved about 10% of the film's financing just for licensing these classic rock songs. And music is through it like a stick of rock. There is lots of kind of musical ephemera. There's the Dark Side of the Moon poster. There's those Kiss effigies. There's David's t-shirt which has Ted Nugent on it. Yeah. And they're off to buy Aerosmith tickets at the end.
Yeah.
So the music is part of their existence. They're riding around listening to music and kind of inhabiting the spirit of it all, which is very romantic. And I think it's just, it would not be that film without the music, the soundtrack.
And that's something Linklater talked about, how this film was actually very hard for him to make because, you know, everybody else around him was having a good time. But he was fighting with the studio about the budget, specifically when it came to the music. And actually, the budget got cut even more because he wanted 10%, but I think it ended up only being like 8 or 6%. And the producer was like, it'll come back in post, and it never did. And apparently he really wanted Led Zeppelin's Rock and Roll to play. I think it was at the end of the credits, which Jimmy Page agreed to, but Robert Plant didn't. So Linklater vowed to boycott Plant for life. And that is the kind of pettiness that I respect in life. Yeah. You know what I mean? Good on you, Linklater. Yeah. That's another reason. Well done, Linklater, because I want that pettiness in my life.
He's Gen X, so he sticks to his principles, man. But I think it's interesting because Dazed and Confused is named after a song that was covered by Led Zeppelin. So there's still that association. But I mean, can we just list some of the bands that are featured on the soundtrack? Because they just need to be mentioned. So you've got Aerosmith. It opens with Sweet Emotion by Aerosmith, which just sets the tone. There's, of course, Alice Cooper's School's Out, most classic thing and the best use of it, I think. There's a song which is so kind of, I think it's Lowrider.
Yes,
is it
yes,
Lowrider?
Yes. Mm-hmm, that's
which
in there.
Is so distinctive.
Yep.
When they're kind of riding around. There's ZZ Top, there's Kiss, there's Peter Frampton, Black Sabbath, Bob Dylan. It's very much sets the tone. It sets it in its era.
And there were 2 soundtracks. So they had the one that was Dazed and Confused in 93. And then the second one that came out in 94 was like even more Dazed and Confused or something like that.
So Linklater, obviously he had the fights with the studio. It wasn't just over the soundtrack, though, was it? It was over the very making of the film and what the film was to be about.
Yeah. Yes. So I talked about that. There was the improv, and that made them nervous. But also, I think they were expecting to get American Graffiti, and they got Dazed and Confused. They got something that was very like anti-nostalgia.
I've got a quote here where he says, the studio, wanted me to put in modern music or reshoot, but I didn't take any of their dumb ideas.
Yes. Yes, Linklater. God, I love his pettiness. I love it. It's not petty. It's principles.
No, exactly. It's principles. That's how he's become the filmmaker that he is, because he sticks to his guns.
Yes.
But yeah, it seems like the studio wanted this kind of sexy stoner comedy.
Yeah.
They wanted him to shoot more scenes with breasts in it.
Yep.
And I think he did one in which a character flashes some of the other characters and then cut it. I think Parker Posey and Joey Lauren Adams both talked about how they felt quite respected by Richard Linklater, and not only that he was taking on board their ideas for the dialogue, but also that he wasn't treating them as sex objects.
Yeah.
And I think there is a scene in which could be Michelle Burke's character, Jodie Kramer, is ranting about how Gilligan's Island is sort of made for the male gaze, essentially. But yeah, he didn't want to make that kind of film. He wanted to make this kind of loose, meandering piece about a time and place.
Yeah.
They didn't give it much of a wide release.
No.
They didn't give it much marketing.
You could see that if Linklater relented, or if it was a different director, how they might give in to maybe demands of like more skin, more sex or whatever, and how it would just become very cliche and very like, I'm thinking of some of the films from the 70s. What were those, like Roadhouse, was it?
Yeah. Or the Carry On films.
Is the Carry On, exactly. Yes. And it was interesting. Now, there was some criticism since and then that this was around the male gaze. This was very male-centered. And he actually recognized that. And that's why he wanted to do Before Sunrise, because he wanted it to be 50-50 and have a more feminine voice and an outlook. So this gave rise to your favorite.
Yes, we should certainly come back to that. I want to just point out one interesting nugget of fact that I saw, which was that apparently the one thing that the studio head, Russell Schwartz, wanted to do was he wanted to set up screenings for Christian and anti-drug groups in order to basically bait them into protesting about the film, to create some kind of publicity and make it this kind of controversial film. I don't get that he actually did, but I think that's such an interesting strategy for 1993, because nowadays I think it would blow up in your face.
Yes.
I think you would get the film banned.
Yeah, totally. Is there anything else we want to talk about before we get to our most, worst, and awards section that we will eventually rename?
Yeah, definitely. So what aged well?
So I think, you go first.
Okay. You know what? I feel it's really difficult to talk about a film that is made 30 years ago, but then is set 2 decades before, in terms of what's aged badly or well, because it's, as I say, it's this kind of observational piece. It's not necessarily taking a stance, because it's got this so-called anthropological view. It's observing them, and it isn't necessarily endorsing them.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't be very realistic if you didn't have teenage boys who behave like pigs sometimes. But often I feel like there's glimpses of chinks between their armor. So they're obsessed with sex and they're often talking about girls in this rather derogatory way. The girls kind of push back to a certain extent, but also they're obsessed because they're not necessarily getting any.
Yes.
And there's one point where the character of the very kind of stoner character, Ron Slater, played by Rory Cochrane, I believe, they climb up to the moon tower and look over the town. And he goes, just imagine how many people out there are fucking right now. And it's sort of the thing that you would only say if you were a virgin.
Yes, exactly.
You know, it's the only thing you would be obsessing over, what you're missing out on.
Yeah.
And so I think there's this thing, for all their bravado, we are perhaps meant to kind of at least look at them with a certain amount of ironic distance. And it doesn't necessarily endorse this. So that is actually more of a preamble into what aged badly, but with the caveat that I don't know if it necessarily is, you know, meant to be endorsing a particular view. But I would say when Matthew McConaughey's character, David Woodison, is standing there and he's going, that's what I love about these high school girls, man. I get older, they stay the same age. That's a line that I think would be very hard. It would be a difficult sell in today's date, you know, even with that irony.
What's funny about that line is I completely agree, because I think even at the time when I saw it, people were like, oh, that's so funny. Ha, 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 ha. Isn't it so funny that that character said that? Whereas now, to your point, post Me Too, post a lot of things, I don't think it would get passed.
It perhaps doesn't have quite the same charm.
Yeah.
But then again, is the film saying he's a bit of a sad character?
Yes.
Because why is this older guy, why does he need to go and hang out with younger people in order to hit on younger girls? Is that because older women know his play and are turning him down? And he's dressing it up as this kind of thing of, I've got my pick of the girls, when actually it's maybe because you can't elsewhere. So perhaps there's that element to it. It's very hard to say because the film is so distanced in that sense. I think also what's interesting is the attitudes towards drugs and smoking. It's everywhere.
Yeah.
At one point, there's a car boot, a trunk filled with beers. It's a funny kind of reveal. So I think Nancy Reagan would have had a fit.
Oh my gosh.
At the amount of pot smoking in this, but also the fact that, you know, from a modern point of view, there's a lot of driving under the influence.
Yes. So I will say, I feel like in the UK, they are much stricter with drinking and driving. Like, that doesn't happen here. In the US, maybe it's becoming less common with like Uber and Lyft and these kinds of things, because now you don't have an excuse. But I can say definitely growing up, I know plenty of people that drink and drive, and it's not uncommon. Now, this is excessive even to what I know about. I think what makes this question, like what aged well, what aged terribly, to your point, is this is essentially a period piece, right? What stuck out to me as an American is these guys are 18 drinking, and in the 90s, they wouldn't be allowed to drink until they're 21.
I thought they weren't allowed to drink until they're 21 then, because of the fact that Kevin's father won't allow him to buy the kegs of beer. I
think that's because he just didn't want to party at his house.
Oh,
so I looked this up. I was like, when could you? Because it was different state by state. But 18 was generally, some places were 19.
Are they 18 though? Are they 17?
So they make a comment as, whose ID did you have to use? And it's 18 because they're at a ball game just drinking willy-nilly.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Which tells me that people know. And actually the older Ben Affleck's characters, you know, he's going through his second year of senior year. So that was something that stuck out to me. It was like there's all this drinking, and like obviously cops don't seem to care as much, but obviously if they're behind the wheel, they will care. And it's not until the 80s that the age went up to 21 in America. I thought something that maybe aged not too well was the trailer. I don't know if the trailer played for you before. I rented this on Apple, and it was like, before MTV. Yep. Okay, cool. Before safe sex. And I'm like, okay, I don't know if that...
Was that the classic trailer then?
That is the classic trailer, like from the 90s. So it's kind of like, I think safe sex was a good thing. Just putting that out there. Again, like I said, it was hard for me that was the only thing that I could think of. Maybe the guys kicking the shit out of each other, the hazing.
I mean, yeah, and again, you kind of think, is the film endorsing that? I don't think it is. I mean,
no.
From a plot point of view, they get their revenge on the worst perpetrator of the violence. And Tony and Mike are sitting there watching the girls hazing the younger girls and commenting on it and saying, nobody seems to care. This is very strange. Like, no one seems to intervene about this. So there are voices that kind of, comment on it. I think a very small thing that made me laugh, but it is, again, maybe a comment on the 1970s attitudes as opposed to the 1990s. But in the grocery store, the clerk is lecturing a pregnant woman about eating her greens.
Yes.
And she's standing there with a cigarette hanging out her mouth.
And I think isn't she buying liquor?
Don't know.
Because it was in a paper bag. And back in the day, that was kind of like the sign.
How funny. So, I mean, the thing is that when I was a small child, the advice, I think, was that you could still drink just very, like, 1 unit a day or something if you're pregnant. And now the advice is a whole panoply of things that you must not even look at.
Yes.
Or else your baby will be born horribly deformed and it'll all be your fault. I think even by the 90s, it was still fairly less strict.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's a by the by. Should we say what does seem to have worked? Just a couple of little nice things about.
Oh yeah,
about
I think
it. Yeah.
The thing is, what I was going to say, I think honestly, it's hard to say like what didn't age well because I think so much of it worked well. In this podcast, we try to think of like what's the most 90s scene, moment, or line. And again, it's hard to say with this film because it is a film filmed in the 90s, set in the 70s, but for me, as someone growing up in the late 90s or like, sowing my oats in the late 90s, early aughts, I was definitely riding around and just aimlessly riding around is a 90s vibe to me. But I think that's just maybe universal in America because I asked my husband, he's like, oh yeah, we did the same thing. So what were you going to say?
Well, I mean, in terms of what's just sort of rather lovely about this film, and again, it's part of the era that it's set in, but I love the fact that the kids are going off to buy Aerosmith tickets at the end, and that's their adventure, and they're having a great old time just driving into the distance, and it's a road trip to go buy Aerosmith tickets. How lovely to do that rather than sit in a digital queue on Ticketmaster, going slightly mad as you see that you are, number 30,000 in the queue, and you'll spend basically the entire day to get to the front of the queue only to discover that it's all sold out.
Yeah.
Apart from the tickets that are way, way, way beyond your ability to buy. And yet all these kids who apparently have no jobs, or at least are spending all their money on pot, are able to afford Aerosmith tickets and to drive off and go get them from the next city over. I love that. A purer time. And I think that might have been a reality in the 90s to a certain extent, that you physically phoned up or went somewhere. Yeah. I think also I want to say about the fashion, again, it's 1970s, but they did it so well that I will mention it here because there's a lot of authenticity.
Yes.
Apparently, they got the clothes from thrift shops in Austin. They're not kind of like crazy over the top outfits.
No.
Apart from one, which I will mention in the awards section. Okay. But I like that there's distinctive styles for the slackers and the jocks and everything. But the star quarterback is nevertheless dressing kind of hippie-ish.
Yeah.
And so he's not trying to show off his muscles and everything. There's a real kind of sense of there's a kind of porousness to the looks of the different characters, and I really like that. I love Jodie's double denim waistcoat and bell bottoms combo.
Beautiful.
I think that's amazing. And I also just want to give a kind of shout out to, there's a brief shot of a couple of girls getting ready for the party that does not happen. And one girl is lying on her bed whilst the other girl does up her extremely tight jeans with a pair of pliers.
Yes.
Brilliant. And they're so tight, she has to be kind of pulled up to stand. And I thought that's such a wonderful observational detail.
Any woman can relate to. Okay, Chloe, what awards do we want to give this? On Total 90s Recall, we like to give up our own awards. Screw the Oscars. Let's give some T90R awards. Do you have any awards you want to give this film?
I do. Okay. I referred to earlier, the most 70s outfit is Kevin's dad. It's played by Richard Dillard.
Yes.
So he appears, he's the one who basically sort of, he knows that Kevin is trying to have a party whilst they're away. And he is wearing a brownish patterned wide collar shirt. We're talking very wide collar.
Yeah.
Underneath a kind of short sleeved safari suit is the only way I can describe it. And it's just fantastically 70s. So love it. And by the same notion, most 70s hairdo, I think Adam Goldberg as Mike has a kind of poodle cut. Love it. And an honourable mention to Anthony Rapp as Tony, has a sort of blonde bob thing.
Beautiful.
I think I probably had a haircut like that at one point.
Yeah. Okay, I got a few awards. I would say the biggest asshole award definitely goes to Ben Affleck's character.
Mhm.
I mean, honestly, he's in some ways, I'd also give him like the saddest person award because he's going through his second year of senior year and he's clearly just, so pathetic and just trying to like make everybody just forget that that's happening. Blink and You'll Miss Her goes to, we already talked about her, Renee Zellweger. Literally, I think I blinked and I missed her because I didn't see her and I had to Google it later, but she's there. I've seen the images. And last for me, the most American moment, and there are a lot, but I think if this movie was made in Britain, this scene would not happen. And that is when the mother comes out in the front door with a shotgun because they're going after her son. And honestly, I respect her totally.
I love that. I know. On the point of women pushing back against male piggery,
Yes.
I like very much how the character of, I think it's Don Dawson. So Dawson tries to chat up the teacher and he sort of says, I won't tell anyone if you want to meet up over the summer. And she doesn't say a word. She just condescendingly pats him on the head and closes the door.
I love that. I wrote that down too.
So I love that. So that could be most condescending or maybe best
response to male piggery.
Yeah, there we go. And I think we have to go for most legendary line. What would you go for?
I mean, come on. All right. That's the most legendary, right?
Apparently it has to be, yeah. But I do love his little speech about, you just gotta keep living, man. LIVIN is brilliant as well. So, those stand out, I think, as the best moments.
Okay, so Chloe, after they watch Dazed and Confused, and they're like, oh, I really like this film. I kind of want to watch something else similar to it. What would you recommend someone to watch?
This is really tricky because I feel like several obvious things come up. One is the one that Amazon was very keen for me to watch, so much so that I can watch the credits, which is Almost Famous, which is, has a very sort of similar thing. It's a Cameron Crowe film and it's autobiographical. He's a would-be young journalist who's following a rock band on tour, but it has that sort of, that vibe. American Graffiti is a contemporary comparison, and studios were apparently even pushing Linklater as the new George Lucas, which seems odd to us now.
Definitely not.
Pre-Star Wars, George Lucas. But I think maybe they should watch Everybody Wants Some, which is the so-called spiritual sequel to Dazed and Confused, made by Linklater. And that's set in 1980.
Those are great. I don't want to recommend this, but like when I was watching, I just couldn't help but think of Superbad.
Okay.
Because again, it's the last day of senior year, or I can't remember if it was the last day of senior year, but it's definitely the last day of school. Jonah Hill That was kind of his breakout role. He was definitely in other things, but that was his breakout role. Emma Stone, again, she was in a bunch of stuff, but that really put her on the map as well. And Michael Cera. Bill Hader, it was his first film. So I'm not going to say it's like a masterpiece, but it is kind of quintessentially, again, looking at those last day or that last day of high school and trying to take what you can from it. And then Wet Hot American Summer, 2001. So thus, it is another one that it was filmed in 2000 or came out in 2001, but it takes place, I believe, also in the 70s. But it has Amy Poehler, and this was actually her first year on SNL. So she wasn't the Amy Poehler we know now. There's also Bradley Cooper, Paul Rudd. Paul Rudd was probably the most well-known actor, but again, not maybe as big as he is now. And Elizabeth Banks is also in it. That was before she broke out. So it's just a fun comedy about a camp and these all clearly adults playing teenagers. And it's just, again, I don't want to use nostalgia because that was kind of, Linklater was very anti-nostalgia, but something filmed in 2001 looking back into the past. So yes, to wrap us up, Chloe, I think I know the answer, but would this be a comfort watch, a good watch, skip it, or a hate watch? What's your final verdict?
It's got to be a good watch. It's a cult classic for a reason, and it landed my beloved Richard Linklater on the map. Even if for him it was a terrible experience, he compared it to having PTSD. I think his pain was worth it for us. I definitely think people should watch it.
His pain was our gain. I completely agree. I loved this on the rewatch. Maybe it's because I picked up on more than I did because I haven't seen it in literally decades. But I just picked up so much more on this watch. And it's just such smart film direction. And yeah, I just think it's a definite good watch. It was an immediate cult classic at the time. So if you have not watched it, go out and you can rent Dazed and Confused on probably any streamer. And we hope you've enjoyed this show. I am Molly.
And I'm Chloe.
And we are Total 90s Recall. Please make sure to like and subscribe wherever you are listening, if that's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And since we are a new podcast, this is only our 3rd episode. A 5-star review wherever you listen would greatly help us being discovered. And also tell a friend. If you're like, reviews aren't my thing, that's okay. Tell a friend, tell a family member, tell the person that you're buying your cigarettes and your liquor from at the store. Enjoy the movies.